there are two sides to the immigration issue. No country can or should have open borders. It's not fair to the people who already live here, or quite frankly, fair to the people who pour over the border who think life immediately will be better. Open borders overload our healthcare systems, our schools, our welfare system, and it creates a humanitarian crisis that is heartbreaking. Charles Foster, one of the top immigration lawyers in the country who actually lives in Houston, and he has spent his life defending immigrants, but he would also tell you we need to control our borders. This is from Charles. We need laws that regulate who can enter our country and specify the terms of their entry and stay. Certainly criminals and gang members should be shown the doors post haste. Our immigration laws and their administration should, first and foremost, represent the interests of the American people, but they should also represent our values. Our panelists will have a lot to say about where we go from here, but before turning it over to them, I'd like to share with you a quote that I recently saw about the importance of civil dialogue. It's actually a prayer. And no matter if you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, agnostic, I just hope you will appreciate the spirit of this prayer. We live in times of fear and division. Sometimes we act as if we are alone, building walls that separate us from one another, forgetting that we are brothers and sisters. Send us your spirit, Lord, to rekindle within us the desire to understand one another, to listen, to live together with respect and compassion. Give us the courage to seek paths of dialogue, to respond to conflict with gestures of fraternity, to open our hearts to others without fear of differences. Make us builder of bridges, able to overcome borders and ideologies, able to see others through the eyes of the heart, recognizing in every person an inviolable dignity. Help us create spaces where hope can flourish, where diversity is not a threat, but a richness that makes us more human. When I read those words, I almost felt like they were written for us, for civil dialogue, for our mission, for us to do better. Who was I quoting? Pope Leo. That's Pope Leo's words. I've been trying to reach out to him to invite him to join us in civic dialogues, but he has yet to answer my email. I was hoping he would come today, but I'm so sorry. We may not have Pope Leo, but we have Linda Laurel. Linda was an Emmy award-winning journalist who anchored the evening news at KPRC for nearly 17 years. Like me, her journalism chops were honed at the University of Missouri. Go Tigers. Today, she is CEO and executive producer of Linda Laurel Media, and she's my partner in crime in civil dialogue. Linda, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Appreciate it. How about a round of applause for Jean? Thank you so much. We're going to keep reaching out to Pope Leo. One of these days, he's going to come join us. Again, we know that you could be anywhere, and we do appreciate you taking the time to engage with us today. Okay, so as we all know, when it comes to immigration in America, things on the ground are changing by the hour, even by the minute, as President Trump makes good on his campaign promise to secure the border and ramp up deportation efforts. Before I introduce our panel, I thought it might be helpful to share a few statistics and some recent news headlines on the immigration front to help give us a little context. The September statistics from Customs and Border Protection show there were 8,386 Border Patrol apprehensions on the southwest border. That's 95% lower than the monthly average of the Biden administration. According to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, 59,760 people are currently being held in detention. 71.5% of those in detention do not have a criminal conviction. immigrants without criminal records have become the largest group currently in detention. NPR reviewed deaths recorded by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and found 20 people have died in ICE custody so far this year. That's the most since 2005. According to the Department of Homeland Security, more than 2 million illegal immigrants have left the U.S., including 1.6 million who have voluntarily self-deported, and more than 527,000 deportations. And here's one more thing to consider before I introduce our panel. The U.S. is experiencing a labor shortage across multiple industries, including healthcare, agriculture, and construction. While declining fertility rates are one of many reasons for the current labor shortage, so are declining immigration rates. A recent survey, for instance, by the Association of General Contractors found workforce shortages are the leading cause of construction project delays, as new immigration enforcement efforts have impacted nearly 1/3 of construction firms. Our first panelist will certainly be able to speak to that during our conversation. Stan Merrick is president and CEO of the Merrick family of companies, one of the largest interior contractors in the Southwest. Stan is the proud descendant of immigrants from Czechoslovakia. His ancestors survived several years of homelessness during the Depression. That history and his employment of several dreamers among the thousands who work for him are just a couple of reasons why he has spent the last 25 years working toward meaningful immigration reform. Stan is a major proponent of a solution called ID and Tax, which we will talk about during our discussion. Please welcome Stan Merrick. Juan Garcia Gomez is in his last semester at the University of Houston, where he will graduate with a major in political science and a minor in journalism. Juan previously attended Lone Star College-Tomball and currently advises incoming freshmen here on campus. Juan is a DACA recipient. His parents brought him to the United States at the age of 7 from Mexico. He is passionate about giving back to his community, and he jumped at the opportunity to be on this panel, despite the heightened climate surrounding the deportation of immigrants. Please welcome Juan. Elizabeth Mendoza is a solo practitioner focusing on immigration law since 1993. A graduate of Rice University and the University of Houston Law Center, Elizabeth has dedicated her career to representing immigrants in removal proceedings and in family, humanitarian, and consular-based cases. Liz has provided pro bono assistance throughout her career to local organizations such as Catholic Charities and the YMCA. She is a frequent speaker at immigration conferences and local churches, informing the community about their rights. Please welcome Elizabeth Mendoza. And last but certainly not least, Matt DeSarno recently joined Odin as president and COO following the acquisition of Verfico Technology, where he was CEO and co-founder. His distinguished career includes 2 decades as a senior FBI executive, culminating as special agent in charge of the Dallas field office. A U.S. Army veteran and experienced technology leader, Matt brings a wealth of leadership in high-stakes environments. At Odin, he is focused on helping companies maintain compliance and protect workers through cutting-edge workforce visibility, wage assurance, and risk mitigation solutions. Please welcome Matt DeSarno. Okay, here you go. And you guys have your mic over there? Okay. So, Matt, I'm going to begin with you. As I just said, you spent a couple of decades in the FBI, and now you run a technology company that has applications that can be used in immigration enforcement. But before we talk about that, I want you to put on your law enforcement hat for a moment and talk about what we're seeing right now in terms of border security and ICE raids. President Trump says he's doing exactly what the American people elected him to do. So I want to get your thoughts on that right now.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for being here. As everybody has mentioned so far, you have plenty of other options. So as Linda mentioned, I spent 20 years in the FBI, and on her first part of her question was about border security. The border is extremely secure. To only have 8,500 apprehensions in a month is significantly lower than the past. What that has resulted in, though, is a push towards inland, or away from the border or interior detentions and deportations. In fact, it has moved. The government has now moved Border Patrol assets into the interior of the country, which is what you see in Chicago all the time. So people keep talking about ICE, 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 ICE. But what we are seeing is ICE, which is the agencies that holds detainees, and then Border Patrol, which is the agency that typically patrols the border but is now being charged with enforcing immigration laws across the country. We're starting to see a convergence of those. So much so that 2 days ago, there was an announcement that many of the ICE executives are being replaced by Border Patrol executives. Border Patrol is a much more enforcement-focused organization. They wear green uniforms, as opposed to the blue uniforms you see at the airport when you come in from overseas. They typically are chasing undocumented people around the border, either in vehicles or on foot. They're stopping networks of undocumented people coming across the border. So now we're seeing them in American cities where technically they are supposed to be within 100 miles of a U.S. international border. So that shift, in my opinion, is going to lead to more aggressive enforcement in the interior of the United States of immigration laws. Now, Linda cited a statistic that there are many, 71% of those in custody don't have criminal convictions. I'll say one thing. I believe that ICE agents and Border Patrol agents, who are the same people that they were under the past two administrations, are not themselves attempting to change the way they operate or evil in and of themselves. The leaders of the organizations set the culture, provide the guidance, and put the orders in place, and these investigators do what they're told by their leaders. The result of this is very disparate enforcement activity in different parts of the country. Where I live in Dallas, we're not seeing all kinds of people being arrested at work sites or at fast food restaurants or at healthcare facilities. That office in Dallas is focused on violent criminals. But in other parts of the country, you are seeing non-criminal undocumenteds get arrested on the street, people doing their job, getting arrested. So it's a challenge. I'll just close this little piece by saying a couple things. Effective law enforcement and public safety in general relies on the public's trust. And if the public and the law enforcement trust breaks down, it doesn't matter if it's ICE, FBI, Houston Police, Tomball Police, Harris County Sheriff's Office. If any of those people, any of those entities break public trust, all those other entities have trouble keeping us safe. So that's what I would finish.
I really appreciate all of that context. I can pass the mic to Elizabeth just for a moment. So Liz, when you hear what Matt just laid out for us, that Border Patrol is now being moved into leadership positions within ICE, what does that mean in real terms, do you think, for the clients that you represent? And tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from your clients.
Excuse me. I think it just incrementally increases the fear and anxiety that mixed status families are experiencing with the current policies in this country. So, I think it's really important for people to understand that when we're talking about immigration, we aren't just talking about people who are here without status. We're all part of this mix. Part of this conversation is American citizens, people who have, green cards, who are permanent residents. A lot of my clients are American citizens who are very, very, very worried about their mixed status family, right? So I'll just use one client, for example. I have a client who he's an American citizen. He's an honorably discharged Marine, honorably served his country in Afghanistan and Iraq. And he's married to a dreamer. And his wife was brought over here when she was a toddler. And her parents, who were responsible for, making sure she complied with the laws, kind of dropped the ball on that. And she now has a deportation order. And DACA protects her.
Would you tell people what DACA is? We've talked about DACA and Dreamer, so let's just make sure everybody
Anybody here heard of
understands.
DACA? Show of hands. Awesome. Okay. It's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's a program that was instituted by President Obama in light of congressional inaction to try and do something about people who were brought here when they were young, through no fault of their own. They'd gone to school here, maybe graduated from high school or college. They came here, they have a clean record. And it was a program that allowed people to, meet the requirements and get authorization to work and some measure of protection from being deported. But that program was canceled during the first Trump administration. There's been a lot of litigation about the program, and it still exists, but because of litigation. So this client I have, who's an American citizen, who's married to somebody in DACA, who has this deportation order on her record, the entire family's anxiety level is through the roof, because if DACA eventually dies, she is subject to being detained and deported, even though she came here when she was a toddler, like 1 or 2 years old. Mm-hmm. So hearing that now there's Border Patrol that's going to be working in the interior, when, most people know Border Patrol, they're supposed to be along the border, not, walking down the streets, patrolling Main Street of Dallas to Chicago or Houston, just makes the anxiety and fear exponentially, higher. So that's definitely something that a lot of mixed status families are dealing with.
So looking at it from the other side of this issue, let's say, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of people who support President Trump and what he is doing. The border was much more open under the Biden administration, and a lot of people who did come in illegally are now in other parts of the country. So the argument could be, well, why shouldn't Border Patrol be able to go into the interior and apprehend those people just because they're no longer on the border, they're still illegal?
Right. I think at the end of the day, you have to address that question in my opinion, in this way. How do you allocate limited resources? Right? And so do you want to fix this problem by trying to round up every single person who's in the country without status and deport them? Do you want to try and focus resources in trying to remove bad actors, people who kill and rape and they're drug dealers? So how do we allocate limited resources? Matt worked for the FBI, for 20 plus years. A lot of FBI agents right now are being taken off of their details, and, they're working on immigration enforcement, not necessarily on, all sorts of other stuff. Right. So, I in my community of immigration attorneys, I don't know of any who are opposed to bad actors being removed from the United States. I don't know of anybody in my community who's like, yes, let murderers and rapists stay. That's a myth. But it's always a matter of, if we have limited resources, how do we effectively focus that to get the most bang for our buck? And so is it trying to go after, my honorably discharged Marine American citizen's wife who came here as a toddler, or somebody who, they're creating a lot of mayhem in our community and they should not be here. Great. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Juan, you have a mic onto your left. So we've been talking about DACA and dreamers, and you are a dreamer. And I said in the intro that you were brought here at the age of 7. I remember when we had our first call to talk about you being on this panel, You said you were eager to be on the panel, and I asked you if you were at all afraid, given the environment that we're living in, just putting yourself out there. So why did you say yes to being here today? Turn at the bottom. Here.
The reason I said yes to this is because I think silence, leads complicity. Even if we are at danger of, being taken, or being, our status being taken away, I think if you have a voice, you're right to say it, because history will remember those people who spoke up, not the people who sat in the sidelines. If we look at history, a lot of the people look at history in the past and go, how did people just let this happen? How did people just not stood up? How did people not, why no one do anything about this when this was going on? It's obviously such a blatant thing. And that's why I chose to speak up about this. As a political science major, studying some parts of the law, I can see that there's a pattern, and if we're not learning about those patterns, then we're bound to repeat them. It's not something, this isn't something that just, happened out of the blue. This has been something that the ground has been set for it, and now the levers are just being taken advantage of.
So you are about to graduate. I know you work part-time right now as an advisor, correct? And you're...
Yes.
Yes, okay. So there are a lot of young people, like you students in the audience, okay, who, when you graduate, you want to be able to get a job. It's not so simple for a dreamer. You have to re-up your status to stay in this country every 2 years, correct?
Yeah,
Are you
that's
concerned about what your future looks like after you've spent all of this time, energy, and money on getting an education?
every day. I'm always looking at the news. It's come to a point where sometimes I have to stop myself from doom scrolling online. Everybody that's here knows what doom scrolling is. The young people, where you're just swiping away on Reddit,
I'm not
on
young,
Instagram.
but I know what doom scrolling is. Okay, just saying. I've been known to doom scroll.
So yeah, every day, coming up with plans like Texas. Right now there's litigation about potentially ending DACA in Texas, just in the state of Texas, and finding out like what's my plan. How am I gonna move states? How am I gonna get a job with limited resources? Because I'm just like everybody else. We're making paycheck by paycheck, or you're paying bills. Yeah, debt. We don't have it any better, right? There's a misconception over there that immigrants get everything handed to them, but we all work just as hard as everybody else to get the bread that we get every day.
Right. Okay, Juan, please give the mic to Stan. So, Stan, I know you employ dreamers. You are in the construction industry. Help us understand. I mean, Juan just talked about, the possibility of having to literally move states in order to be able to get a job. I know we did, Stan and I do a lot of work together, and we do a lot of town halls together. We did one at his place of employment, or his business, just a week or so ago. And one of your dreamers, his DACA status is up like next February, and he's not sure if he's been working for you for 10 years. What happens if he has to leave the state? And then just the whole idea of where we are right now and what that means for you as a business owner that relies on a lot of immigrant labor to do the work.
That's a lot of questions.
I know, but I know you can. I know
Well,
you can.
First of all,
together.
my dreamers, I don't care if I go to jail, they're going to keep working for me. And they know that. I've got their back. And I don't think that's going to happen. And as far as our workforce, yes, construction, what do you see on construction? Housing, schools, Latinos. It was the Italians, the Germans, and Czechs after World War II, and eventually in the 70s, the Latino population. And I've been fighting this, seems like my whole life. I was around in '86. I thought what President Reagan did was courageous. 3 million undocumented in the country, a path to citizenship. Not many took it. I mean, it's amazing how many didn't take it because they could get a Social Security card at the flea market, and you could get a Texas driver's license, so why even try? Well, they regretted it later on. So but every president I've talked to, every person in Congress for the last 25 years, we got to secure the border first before we can do anything. This president secured the border. Whether you like it or not, there's nobody coming across. They're scared to death. We got more people leaving the country, which is not good for the U.S. eventually. And so we got the border secure. The next thing we need to do is take care of the asylum system. Our asylum system is broken. We have people that were coming in, signing up for an appointment that would be 3 years later, getting a work permit, being able to work, and then being told 3 years later you don't qualify, go back. That wasn't working. So he's in the DACAs. We have, when President Obama, by executive order, put DACA into not law but offered it, 700,000 kids like you who were born here, who were not born here, got here before the age of 16, applied for status. 700,000. And it was closed under the Trump administration, while there were 1,700,000 more kids waiting in line that are still waiting in line. These are kids we put through grade school, middle school, high school, in-state tuition in every state but Texas. That's another topic. And then when they graduate, they can't get a job. And this is very important for you to understand something. When you leave this university and you go look for a job, you're going to have two options. You're going to work as a W-2 employee, which means you work for a company, and you're going to pay Social Security of 7.65%, which I, the employer, are going to match. So 15 cents of every dollar you make is going to go to Social Security and Medicare, which when you get to my age, you'll get something to reward you for your 50, 60 years of labor, Social Security. Or you'll go to work as an independent subcontractor, where your employer will say, you're 1099, you can pay self-employment taxes if you want to, but if you get hurt, we don't have workman's compensation. Now, those two options are all that's going to be available to you. If you go into construction, 5 out of every 10 jobs are independent subcontractor. No taxes, no career, no future. So the reason we are experiencing the biggest work shortage in the history of this country is because, 1, a declining birth rate, 2, the lack of vocational training up until recently, and 3, the fact that you can't get an hourly job for an employer because the government is not enforcing the laws. Long story. The solution to this whole thing, if they just listen to me, I've tried to call the Pope Tuesday.
Before we get to the solution,
Okay.
before we get to the solution, I want to ask you, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a minute, because I know people have said to you, Stan Merrick, you just want cheap labor. It's all about cheap labor. You just, that's why you're pushing for immigrants to be able to stay in the country and work for you for less than what they should be paid. What's your answer to that?
Well, the construction industry wants legal labor, qualified labor, higher wages. When I got out of college in A&M back in '69, I went to work as a union carpenter. I was making more than most college graduates. Think about that. Today, totally reversed. You get out of college, you're going to be making more probably, but the workers, the wages have not gone up to keep up with inflation even. So what I want is a legal workforce, which will probably be immigrant, because we're not producing enough babies. There's a ton of options for kids, and our economy is continuing to grow. And we have a lot of workers that were like my generation, went through the unions, went through the trades, that are retiring. So in the next 10 years, something like 40% of the experienced workers are going to be retiring, and we don't have people replacing them. Construction, if you're considering it, man or woman, is going to be it's going to be the golden age of construction for the next 25, 30 years, and you will not be replaced by AI. Think about that. And if you go in right out of high school or right out of here, you may not have any college tuition to pay off. So by fixing immigration, fixing misclassification of workers, which means you're a W-2 worker and not 1099, will change the entire environment for the country. I could go a long time on this, but Linda's not going to give me that much time.
No, we're going to get to the solution piece in a minute. So I want to go back to Juan for a moment. So Juan, what are your how has your I guess your day-to-day sort of life changed or not over the last 8 to 9 months, the way that the current immigration situation is right now? How has it changed for you?
You have to be more self-aware than usual. Something as simple as having a brake light out can be detrimental. So I'm always checking to make sure my brake lights are working, checking that my signal lights are working, because something as benign as that can, attract attention. And most people here, they'll get pulled over for a light or something and don't think anything of it. You get a ticket or something or a warning and you're off to go. But nowadays, something like that you get pulled over, you get a license, you don't know who's pulling you over. That could lead to something, that could escalate to something else, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something, my day today is just making sure I'm careful with my driving, making sure I have everything up to speed, checking where I'm traveling. I'm not going out as much, right? Most students probably go out to party once a while or something, go hang out with friends. Sometimes when I get hit up by friends, I'm staying home because I don't want to attract that type of trouble. If you go out to a party, right, or a bar or something, and something happens there, and you get caught up on that, that could be the difference between you being able to come to work the next day or being sent over to a different place. Because right now, things are a little bit sketch. Mm-hmm. Our DACA recipients are being sent over, they're being detained. Even though they have DACA, they're not taking DACA into consideration when they're stopping you, when immigration enforcement is stopping you.
Matt, I know you want to pick up on that. Do you think, I'm sure you would agree that Juan being this careful is a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, he's verbalizing what I was trying to, he did it much more eloquently than what I was trying to say, is when the public or significant portions of the public do not trust law enforcement, all of our public safety is diminished, right? He brought up a very benign example of a taillight out. But if Juan witnessed a murder, I bet Juan didn't see nothing, ain't talking to nobody about that murder, not the police, right? So that's a problem, and it's a widespread problem, and it goes to this point that law enforcement is dependent on the community's trust. And in communities where there's a lack of trust between the community and law enforcement, the rate of violence and the danger to that community, it just rises, and that's just a fact. I worked street gangs in Chicago for 7 years. The community didn't trust law enforcement, and you end up with 1,000 murders a year. So it's a big issue. It's a major challenge, and it's a legitimate fear. And really, what communities need to demand accountability and transparency from their law enforcement entities. That's what needs to happen.
So Liz, I'm wondering what you are telling your clients in terms of how they should comport themselves, knowing what their rights are. If ICE were to show up on this campus and just start randomly, trying to ask people what their status is, what's the answer? What are you telling your clients? Could you share the mic, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, when I'm speaking with people in my office or when I'm in the community, either speaking at a church or something like this, I try to educate people about what their on paper rights are. And I'll explain in a minute why I said on paper, what their rights are, and then reality, and how they're supposed to handle each, right? So if Juan's my client and he gets pulled over by the cops in Rosenberg because, his taillight is out, and they ask for ID, which he must show in the state of Texas because it's a criminal offense to not ID yourself to law enforcement if they ask for it, and he is with a law enforcement officer who decides to ask about his status, I will explain to my client, Juan, you don't have to answer that question. That has nothing to do with, why you're being stopped because your taillight is out. That's a traffic matter. You do not have to answer a question regarding your immigration status.
Yeah, but if you don't.
But if you don't, so then there's your rights on paper and then reality, right? So if one decides, well, I'm going to exercise my right to, not incriminate myself and not answer a question that has zero to do with my taillight being out, I explain to people there's a 99.99% probability that you are going to be detained. That's real world. Like, we live on planet Earth. That is probably going to happen. And then you will be taken to a jail. And at some point, the jail will probably contact ICE. 99% probability that they'll contact ICE. ICE will show up at some point and start talking to my client Juan. And there's a very, very high probability that they will ask him to sign certain documentation that he has a right to not sign. The documentation will probably be him agreeing to be deported. And so he has a right not to sign that and to ask to see an immigration judge to try and ask for a bond so that he can fight whatever the immigration laws permit him to fight in immigration court in front of an immigration judge. So something, exactly what one said, something as benign, exactly to the T what he said, something as benign as you didn't signal that you're going to turn left could literally trigger, you get deported. And that's not an exaggeration. That literally happens. It's relatively frequent that people who are stopped as a result of a traffic offense, don't know their rights and they're signing away. And before they know it, you're deported. If you are detained and you happen to be Mexican and you're signing documentation, there's a real probability that you will be in Mexico the day of or the day after your detention, because the border is 5 or 6 hours away from Houston. So we try to educate people regarding what their rights are, rights that they have pursuant to our laws, and then reality and how they should navigate reality. So, yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk now about solutions, and then I'm coming into the audience, so I hope you guys have some questions and comments and whatnot. So Stan, I know one of the things that you are a huge proponent of is something called ID and tax. So this would be, I'm going to let him explain it, but I want to talk about solutions other than what we're seeing right now. I think as Liz said, everybody wants criminals to be deported. Okay, but that's not what we're necessarily seeing as the way things are right now. This is a multi-pronged, difficult issue. And Stan, talk about one way that we might start to address it.
Yeah, we've got a lot of people, my industry, hospitality, everybody, with people in Washington. And we've all agreed on what needs to happen is, let's get, well, first of all, we've got 11 to 22 million people who are out of status in the United States.
Stan, hold a little closer.
But really, we don't know how many people are here that are undocumented. Nobody knows. But what we propose is, let's get rid of the felons, which they're doing, but we need to have a program that looks like an adult DACA. And our proposal is, let's say you've been here 5 years and you're willing to have a background check, do facial recognition so we know exactly who you are, and then you have to find employment with an employer like me who is a W-2 employer. In other words, you have to work by the hour and pay taxes, but you get benefits for that too. Workman's comp if you get hurt, safety training, et cetera. So and then once you do that, then you'll have to renew every 2 years just like DACA. But think what we're doing now. We're spending billions of dollars trying to round people up that don't want to be rounded up. We're stressing a whole lot of people. But if we just said one thing, okay, the program is open, just like we opened DACA. DACA had 700,000 people the first year sign up, give all their information to the government, get a work permit, and they're still working. A little stressed, but they're working. Do the same thing for the adults. Come on in, sign up. You got legal status. You can get a driver's license. You can finance a car. You can finance a house. You can quit worrying about being deported. Have it, renewed every 2 years. It's a no-brainer. And what people don't realize is if you bring in 1 million of people undocumented onto a W-2 payroll, the Social Security and Medicare alone is $5.5 billion a year. and you don't spend $1 rounding anybody up, and you ID everyone who is here that is willing to join the program. Now, a lot of people we've talked to says, why would they do that? People aren't going to give their information to the government, but every dreamer I've talked to just said, watch them, because they see what happened to 700,000 kids, and we're not going to deport these kids, and the adults will follow suit. So it's a very simple, and if you call your congressman and say nothing more than I support ID and tax, that will benefit the program. The elected officials know what they need to do, they just don't have the courage to do it.
And we also have now the technology that would allow for that to
Absolutely.
happen. And Matt, you can speak to that. Explain a little bit more about Verfico. You've talked about your law enforcement background. Talk now about the technology that your company has and how it could help with Stan's solution of ID and tax.
Certainly, yeah, and to kind of build on what Stan was talking about, so the construction industry and many other industries have these two sets of workforces. One of them is in the dark, and one of them is in the light, right? And the construction industry has, as Stan mentioned, way too many people working under the table with no access to workers' comp insurance, no benefits, no protections. So I founded Verfico in 2022 because my brother's company, which is a large drywall company, much like Stan's, found themselves in some legal trouble because one of their subcontractors was underpaying workers below minimum wage under the table. And then that responsibility rolled up to the big subcontractor, the company which is like Stan's company, and also to the large general contractor. They were all responsible for this. So what we did was we created a workforce visibility and compliance tool to allow responsible companies like Stan's to see exactly how their subcontractors are operating. Are they hiring W-2s? Are they paying in compliance with the law? Are they providing the required workers' comp protections and other benefits that are required by just basic law? So then we merged our companies, where my company was purchased by a company called Odin, and we add on top of that access control, credential management, really understanding who's on the job site. So we collect data about workers to include, in some cases, if our client wants to, do they have the authorization to work in the United States? And some workers want to collect a copy of their I-9 or a copy of their driver's license or a copy of some other citizenship documentation, and we can store all that. So we are helping, our goal is to help clean up that industry, clean up the labor market in that industry, demonstrate responsibility so that leaders can find the courage to pass something like ID and tax, right? You're demonstrating our largest employer of immigrants in the U.S. as an industry is construction because of the pure number of workers. And if we can clean that in, if we can demonstrate the ability to clean up the labor pool in that industry, then we can hopefully spur some courage in Washington to say, this can be done across the board. It just requires dedication, courage, and actual accountability.
And one of the things that you're trying to clean up, and Stan, you can speak to this, and then I'm coming into the audience, is the labor broker market that has exploded because it is so easy to get a fake ID. So as Matt just explained, you've got the sub, you know, and the general contractor. There are laws that are in effect, but it ultimately is up to Stan as the employer to make sure that the people he's employing are legal. But somebody shows him a driver's license that looks legal, he's not going to spend all of his time and resources trying to decide if this person is legit. So Stan, speak to that and how the solution could help that situation.
Yeah, what she's talking about, labor brokers, is like contractors who sub to resub down just to people. They have no identification. A lot of them just work for cash. But the biggest problem for employers like me and anybody is fake IDs. You Google fake ID. You can get anything you want anytime. A lot of it is identity theft. They may have Lou's social security number and Lou's name, his identity, and they can go to work and be e-verified in the government system and pass. And you get permanent residence cards off the internet, and there's really no way to check them. And what really ought to happen is if these are W-2 employees, when we send the money to Social Security, they ought to say, wait a minute, their name doesn't match the number, they send it back. They don't send the money back, they keep it. So, I mean, the system is broken. The IRS isn't doing anything about it. Wage and Hour isn't doing about it, and our government's doing nothing about it because it's just too political. It doesn't have to be. ID and tax start just like you did with the DACA. Go to the adults, not just in construction, but across the board. We'd fix it in a year. But we'll see what happens.
Okay. Anybody have a question? Yes. Good. I love it when the hand goes up first because I was ready to start tap dancing. Okay.
Thank you. To the gentleman on the left here, you've spoken eloquently on the issues befalling like ICE and Border Patrol, right, and the cultural problems, as you put it, that are top down. I don't mean to be antagonistic or critical, but if one applied like Nuremberg law or anything like that, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just following orders wouldn't really fly. What would you say to the kind of broader units of ICE and Border Patrol that are, you know, committing these kind of heinous acts that we see on the internet all day, of these videos where people are just getting beaten up and having their rights violated, even as citizens?
I completely agree with you. It would not apply, and I say that what I said about the line agents and line officers is that I don't believe that they have bad intention, but I'm not justifying the action at all, and nor should any of us. I mean, I think that there is a requirement for each individual to determine where their line is based on what's moral, ethical, and legal, and just do that. Now, the challenge that with Border Patrol specifically is they're used to working on the border in remote area. They don't. I'm not giving them an excuse, but they're just not trained or ready to operate in an urban environment. They work on the border, east of El Centro, California, where every person that they encounter basically needs to be detained to figure out what's going on, because it's this desert area of open border, right? And I worked in that area for a while. And there are water points. There was always water points set up because it's hot and dry and desert, and there are undocumented people coming across that open border, the open ground all the time. So if you're a trained Border Patrol agent, everybody you ever encounter in your job, you handcuff them and figure out who they are, and then you stick that person in a city, and they're handcuffing everybody, figuring out who they are. They're not suitable for that work, and that's a big problem. And now they're going to put the leadership of that organization over the leadership of ICE, which causes the concerns that Liz talked about.
Okay, another question? Yes. Okay. I'm coming to you in just a minute. Let me do this one first. Excuse me. Okay, what's your question?
For Elizabeth over there, when even people that are here legally are detained or are at the risk of being detained, what actual protections are there? Because in many situations, my parents do not even want me to go out, even if we are here legally, even if we have the documentation to prove it. Some of my friends have also struggled with these things.
So we got a recent decision from one of our immigration agencies that states that if you are detained and you ask for a bond from an immigration judge in an immigration court so you can pay it and be released and can continue with your immigration case, this very recent decision says if the judge learns that you entered the country illegally, no bond for you. If you entered the country with a visa, and maybe you entered years ago and you never left, you can get a bond. So as you can imagine, if you find yourself detained and the immigration judge is telling you no bond for you, but you can present to me the case that you like, and I can hear your case in about 8 months. So you stay in this detention center the next 8 months waiting for me to hear your case, where you can sign that paperwork agreeing to be deported. And so what a lot of people right now are facing who are in detention is, do I want to stay in detention for months and months and months and months waiting to have my day in court, which I'm legally entitled to have, but who's at home taking care of my family, my job, paying my bills, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to have a lot of people who, under those circumstances, they're going to go ahead and say, go ahead and deport me. The rights that people have are being limited almost on a weekly basis for people who are detained. So, yeah.
Thank you, Liz. What's your question or comment?
I had a question for Mr. Stan Merrick, correct? You're the one that commented on the support ID and tax. I was wondering what channels we would have to go through to be able to support this more effectively and how to gain more information on it.
Well, I think the best thing you could do is just call your congressman. All y'all are probably over 21 or right there, and you're going to vote in the elections, hopefully. And they're real. You know, if you call them and you're for something, there's a pile of letters. If you're against something, there's a pile of letters. So the more the input they get that, hey, I support ID and tax, the more they're going to be willing to vote for it or get involved with it. Everybody wants to solve this issue now because President Trump is making it very unbearable, not just on you, on the business community, nobody to clean the buildings, the hospitals, nobody, nurses, landscaping, food service. I mean, the time is right, finally, to fix this. And if it's going to have to be done Trump's way, that's his way. But, you know, he's a developer. He's got golf courses. He's got hotels. He knows we need the labor. But Congress has not been able to agree on anything. And civil dialogues, like Ms. Becker talks about, is the way that we're going to solve this. So call your congressman, your senator, vote in the primary elections, and be vocal about it. I mean, ID and tax is a very sensible solution, common sense, which is not something we see in Congress. That help you a little bit?
And that was a great question. And speaking of the election, if you are of voting age, there is an election next week, and you need to vote. You know, it's important. There are 17 legislative items on the ballot about changing the Constitution of the state of Texas. It's important. Pay attention and vote in every single election, not just the big ones.
Just want to be real clear. Primary elections, that's what this is coming up, primary. It's not, these people will be moved to the next step, which is general election. 7% of Texans, 7% voted in the last primary. We have to kick those numbers up. We need your help.
Jean.
I don't have a question. I have a comment. So be thinking of your next question. One of the things I'm getting asked for a lot of advice right now is Thanksgiving. So let's talk about Thanksgiving. Do you and your family, do you agree on politics? Do you agree on everything? No. So here's my advice on Thanksgiving. I actually heard this at a funeral, believe it or not. Mic drop. A lot of people are worried about Thanksgiving this year. And so here's my advice. This man gave a eulogy at a funeral of a good friend of mine. The man who died was a conservative Republican. His best friend in life was a liberal Democrat. But they remained best friends, and they saw each other a couple times a year. And this is what they did. For the first 10 minutes they were together, they were allowed to talk politics. And after that, politics was off the plate. They weren't allowed, they could talk about anything else, the weather, sports, gossip, but they couldn't talk politics. I was allowed to witness this firsthand. By the time President Bush died, he died 7 years ago, he and Bill Clinton were best friends. I think President Bush was the father Bill Clinton never had, quite frankly. I would listen to the two of them argue politics, and then they would go play golf. They also gossip. I'm not going to tell you what it was. You can see me later. But just have my advice to all of you who are going home for Thanksgiving, or even when you're out to dinner with friends, have a plan. Remember that what unites you is more powerful and more important than what divides you. But maybe go out on the front porch or in the backyard and say, okay, we can talk politics for 5 minutes and then talk about the Astros, the Texans, anything. But just don't bring it to the Thanksgiving table. I just wanted to give you that advice because you're young and I'm old and I'm allowed to do that. Okay.
I-
What Pope Leo would
Yes, it's what Pope Leo would want. And I'm so glad you talked about the relationship between 41 and President Clinton. And, you know, I don't know how much you guys, you younger ones, know about that era of our history. But, you know, President Clinton pretty soundly beat President Bush in that election. And President Bush was not happy. It was very, very difficult for him. He talks about it. He wrote about it in his diary. Gene, you need to read all of Gene's books. They're all fantastic. Seriously, look her up and read all of her books, and she goes into great detail about the lessons that he learned. And if those two men at that highest level, who were like this for a very long time, could get to the point where, as she said, they were best friends, and Jean literally held President Clinton in her arms as he sobbed at President Bush's funeral. So what is, you know, that says we can get there. We can get there. And the question is, you know, whether we choose to get there or not. So I'm so glad you brought that up, Jean. Thank you. This is my husband, okay, whom I love very much, and he has a question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't know if I needed to stand up or not.
No,
but,
you're fine.
okay, my question is just, tell me, and it's open to all of you, what happens to me? I'm a citizen, and an officer or ICE pulls me over and starts asking me a bunch of questions. And what do I do? What do I say?
That's a Liz question.
So that's a really, really good question. And before I answer it, I'll tell you this. For the first time in my life, I'm 57. I'm an American citizen. I'm born here. My kids are born here. For the first time in my life, and I know that this is a privilege, I now have to take into consideration what documents do I have on me in case what you said happens to me and happens to my kids, right? So that's something that my clients have to deal with on the daily. But for the first time ever this year, I'm now thinking, wow, you know, my kid who goes to college north of Austin, when she drives home, she has to drive through a bunch of small towns. The way, no offense to anybody, cops sometimes treat people in small towns might not be the same way you're treated if you're stopped in downtown Houston. What happens if she gets stopped for a traffic issue and a cop starts telling her, hey, where are you from? Now, I don't know any American citizens who are used to carrying on them their birth certificate or their passport. I don't know any. I've never met anybody who does that. My clients do, but I don't know any American citizen who does that. So I am now in charge for the family of ordering our American passport cards so that we can carry those in our wallet. And I have instructed my kids, if you get pulled over for a traffic stop and a cop starts asking you immigration questions, you have to let the officer know that you have proof of American citizenship on you, let the cop know where it is in the car, ask the cop for permission to reach for the document and show the document, and hopefully that will end that line of questioning. But if it doesn't, then as soon as they can make a call from jail, they call me. And I start trying to do things to get them out of detention. If it gets even more hairy, where they call ICE. They call ICE. ICE has a way to be able to determine, you know, pretty much on the spot if the documents that my kid is showing are legit and that my kid's really born here. And at that point, presumably, hopefully, they get released. So it can go south really fast, but not going to lie, you know, I'm an American citizen, the kids are, my husband is, and we will start carrying on us proof that we are American citizens. So hopefully we could avoid winding up in ICE custody or deported. So I've told my kid, you have the right not to answer those questions about where you're from, but as you heard me say earlier, I've told my kids, you'll probably be detained if you refuse to answer those questions.
If you refuse to answer their questions, you can be detained, even if...
Well, let's put it this way. If a cop decides to tell my kid, I'm not arresting you because you refuse to answer my questions about your immigration status. I'm arresting you because you didn't signal that you were going to turn left. I'm going to arrest you because you veered 1 foot out of the lane. That's why I'm arresting you. Now, she's not stupid. She knows why she's being arrested. Is the cop going to tell her to her face why they are arresting her? Of course not. So there's reality. There's reality, and then there's what your rights are on paper.
Okay, Lou, you can keep talking to Liz offline. Okay, okay. The privilege of a wife. Okay, when the wife has the mic, this is what happens. Okay, what's your question?
Hello. Well, mine is like a two-part. So I was raised in the border, so I'm an American citizen. Well, I don't have to, but anyways, I'll say it. But the thing is, I'm so used to having the passport. So for me, that's like, now that I hear you say it, and people who are here, like that for me was like a thing, because it was the norm. I would cross, come back, and live, and come back, and like I have a house over there and this. So it's very normal, but then I haven't done it for a couple of 5-10 years now, because I've been living here in the Houston area. So I can see that as a big impactful now port. Now the other section that is also kind of my thing is the tail lights and all, and what we were talking about. I'm so used to that. I'm just trying to kind of send here a little message. Because when you're crossing the border, like those are sometimes the things that they check for things for inspection. So, but they're just translating it, unfortunately, to this type of scenarios. And then the other question I do have is, since the elections are coming up November 4th, if I'm not mistaken, or what are the places that I can look at information that it's unbiased, but it also tells you, like you're saying, the reality, what's on paper to what the effect will be on society.
So, okay, when it comes to the getting information about the election and the issues, you could go to the League of Women Voters. You can go to your local newspaper. Like in Houston, the Houston Chronicle will print a voter guide. All the local television stations, KHOU, KPRC, KTRK, KRIV, they all have election guides that tell you what the issues are. And then if you want to read what the endorsements are, you can read that and see what they say. Like the Houston Chronicle will give you their endorsements, and then they will tell you why they are endorsing this particular issue or person or whatever the case may be. And thank you for the context of going back and forth from the United States to Mexico across the border is like was an everyday thing, but it's a much more difficult and dicey
just one
situation
thing,
now.
that's a great point. So when we cross international borders, both our own international borders and others, by virtue of crossing an international border, you're basically forfeiting your, what we call in America, our Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search. We are submitting to searches by crossing any borders. So any American going back and forth across the border can be searched at the U.S. border. If you're going from, into Germany, you can be searched at the German border. So that's why, that's one of the challenges here with the Border Patrol leadership that's taken over interior ICE operations, right? They operate in an environment where there are no rules against illegal search and seizure on the border and near the border in many instances, unlike the way we live in the United States, the interior of the United States, where we do rely on that Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure.
Okay, we're down to our last couple of minutes. Oh, do we have another question? Yes, okay. Let's get this in before we finish up. Would you mind coming out? Thank you. Thank you so much.
For Mr. DeSarno, you'd use the term open border. There's oftentimes kind of a misunderstanding of how that term is defined.
Yeah.
I've heard it in ways, kind of what you mentioned, that simply that there's no physical barrier between the border. But I've also heard it used in terms of the implication that certain administrations have directed, say like Border Patrol, to not enforce laws, to allow individuals to come over.
Yeah.
Could I get a clarification as to what that term means and what it doesn't mean?
Yeah, so, it means both things you just said. So there are areas of the southwest border where there's just no barrier, right? We didn't build the wall and Mexico didn't pay for the wall. We don't have that whole thing covered. It's just not the case. there are many, many, many miles where you could walk from here to there, and you're in Mexico here, in the United States there. It's not all covered by the Rio Grande either. So there is actual physical open borders. And then there were policies that were allowing people to come in and, like Stan said, claim asylum, get a court date way out in the future, and be allowed to come in. And we saw caravans of people coming in. You saw big packs of Haitians coming in that was widely publicized, right? So, yeah, there are open border policies are one thing, which are over, and there are parts of the U.S. border that are just open, right? Does that clear it up?
Go ahead, Liz.
And just to piggyback on that, part of this open border debate, and we've talked about asylum, our asylum law mandates you have to physically be here to apply for asylum. So if you're fleeing persecution back home and you have a bona fide case, this isn't some kind of scam, this isn't you just trying to worm your way into the country because you want to get a work permit, you have a bona fide claim, right? You can only apply for it if you're physically here. So if we end open borders, you're stuck outside because you're not here. You're not physically here, so you can't start a process. So part of this conversation is the abuse of our asylum laws, right? And how do we ameliorate that, but still offer protection to people who they have a bona fide claim because they really have been persecuted back home. So how do you fix all of that? So that's part of this whole open borders conversation.
I wish we had more time, but I know you have to get to your next class. Can we change the slide to the QR code, please? I want to make sure that if you have an opportunity, you could please fill out the survey for us. We're always trying to get better at civil dialogues. We want to know more about how we can better serve the community. It'll also give you an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter to just kind of stay in touch with us to see what we're doing around the country. How about a round of applause for all of our panelists? And on behalf of Jean Becker and me, I just want to say thank you to Clark and Annie and all the folks here at Lone Star College-Tomball for having us. Thank you for being such an engaged audience. Continue to stay engaged. Don't forget to vote. Reach out to your representatives to express yourself. It does matter. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
I would talk to 5 people about this.
I get the sense that